Thank you, Vicki. All right, I'm going to share my screen. And okay, can everyone see that? Okay, great.
Yes, you might want to put it in, is this the slideshow? It looks, or the individual slides?
It's a slideshow.
Okay.
Do you see this, the first slide?
We see
Okay.
like the whole, like everything, not just the slide. Is there a way to hide?
Oh, okay. Hold on. Hold on. Thank you. Let's see. All right. Does that look better?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. I'm excited to be here with you all and hope that you find this presentation informative. This is the first time that the College of Medicine Office of Advancement is offering this training on foundation and corporate funding, and we hope that you will find it useful and welcome your feedback and recommendations for the future following today's presentation. So a little bit about what we are going to cover today. We're going to talk about an overview of College of Medicine advancement team structure and the Director of Corporate Foundation Relations. That's me, my role. How does corporate and foundation giving work? Some of the tips and tricks we are here to share with you. Basics of identifying, working with, and stewarding corporate and foundation partners. Tips on presenting your project to an external audience. Grant writing tips and resources, and how to work with and best utilize the College of Medicine advancement team. So before I start, I just wanted to take a moment to introduce myself and my colleague, Dina Kutinsky, who will be joining today's call. So I'm the Director of Corporate Foundation Relations for the 3 campuses of the College of Medicine. I joined the college during the summer of 2020. And my role is a new one for the college. So there hasn't been a dedicated CFR person for just College of Medicine for some time. I have worked for 15 years in corporate foundation and government relations, primarily in healthcare. And during that time, I've worked on grants and other philanthropic giving from public and private foundations, corporations and corporate foundations, and local, state, and federal funders. So much of that time has been spent working with faculty and staff to develop new programs, expand existing initiatives, fund research, evaluate the effectiveness of health interventions, and pursue goals related to health equity, patient outcomes, and innovation. So I will let my colleague Dina introduce herself. Like Vicki said, Dina is part of our Chicago-based team, but she'll be one of your interim contacts at Rockford. As Laura Knight, the Director of Development for the Rockford campus, will be leaving the organization in early November. So while we recruit to fill Laura's role, Dina and I will both be available to you, as will Miranda Pushkar, who's the Assistant Director of Development for the Rockford campus, to assist with CFR and other fundraising efforts. So Dina, if you want to introduce
So
yourself.
thanks for having me, Morgan. Like Morgan said, I'll be your interim person in the meantime while Laura is, I think her last day in the office is November 4th. But I'm working closely with Dean Alex and the hiring team to fill that position. I oversee all of the gift officers in Peoria, Rockford, and here in Chicago. I'm also the interim chief advancement officer right now with some other cohorts of colleagues helping out while we have a lot of positions to fill. But I'm excited to be here. I love Rockford. I love Dean Alex. I love your mission. I love everything you guys do there. So I'm excited to be a part of your team.
Dina. So a little bit about what we do, what the Corporate and Foundation Relations team at the College of Medicine serves to do, to strengthen and drive key relationships between UICOM and private philanthropic organizations, to identify key College of Medicine initiatives that have great potential for corporate and foundation support, and drive fundraising and solicitation strategies around them, to support College of Medicine faculty and other university staff as they seek corporate and foundation support for their projects or programs, to serve as liaison to college level gift officers, university-wide advancement and central CFR team to coordinate and facilitate partnerships and ensure consistency of message. We also work with the central CFR team and the Office of Sponsored Programs to coordinate instances when funders only accept one submission per organization. And in those cases, an internal limited submission process is required prior to applying. So we work with central teams to ensure that that process is happening and happening smoothly for faculty. And we also provide technical support to assist faculty and staff in preparing and submitting grant applications and other requests for support. We can help with reviewing guidelines and proofreading, pulling required attachments and organizational data or other information that may be required. And for larger proposals, we can also be available to help with writing. We also work to connect you with additional resources that are available through the Office of Research Development Services and the Office of Sponsored Programs. So this slide provides some details on the different types of funding that we work with. I won't get into a lot of the detail, but generally most support from foundations and corporations comes in the form of gifts, grants, or contracts. And this slide provides a detailed overview of the different types of funding that and kind of the strings that come with all of those different types of funding. So for the purpose of today, and since many of you are here related to finding funding for your research projects, most of what we'll talk about today will be around grants. So some support for research may take the form of sponsored research projects, and that can come through as a contract versus a grant, but that distinction is not super important at this point and is more about how the funding is received and administered on the back end. And I would just say that if you have questions or are interested in learning more about sponsored research, you should contact the Office of Sponsored Programs in Chicago for assistance, and we can help to facilitate that if you have questions. So for grants, funds are used to support an institutional goal or public purpose. The scope is defined in an award. The university must report on use of funds, progress towards defined goals, and funds may be returned if the terms are not met. And then it's received by the University of Illinois and it's administered once the award comes in by the Office of Sponsored Programs. So I think what's most important to note is that grant funding typically requires a set of measurable goals, tasks, or activities that are proposed at the time of applying and upon which the funding is contingent. There's usually a grant agreement signed by both parties with the understanding that if the activities are as proposed are not completed or not completed without explanation and plan for recourse, then those funds may need to be returned. With outright gifts, which sometimes foundation and corporate funding can take the form of, once the funding is received, there are typically fewer strings attached, but continuing to steward the donor relationship is still very important, of course. Also, if we keep in mind that grants and gifts from foundations and corporate foundations are intended to support an institutional goal or a public purpose, then we are better able to focus our search criteria for funding by looking for opportunities where corporate and/or foundation funding priorities line up directly with the work that you all are doing. So who makes grants? Government agencies, including federal, state, and local entities, make large and often complex grants to support projects with a proven track record, looking to expand or develop new initiatives aligned with legislative priorities. And I should just take a moment to say that if questions come up during the presentation, please feel free to add those to the chat. And we'll go through at the end and try to answer all those questions and hopefully have time for additional conversation. But if possible, please just submit those via the chat. And then for foundations, making grants. There are national, regional, local, family, community, and corporate foundations. There's many different kinds of foundations out there, and they are all funding in a wide variety of ways to support a wide range of priorities on the community, local, regional, and national level. And then businesses and companies, including professional industry associations. Corporations provide funding to support and grow initiatives for a varying array of reasons and priorities that we'll get into later in further detail. Okay, and why do they make grants? They may be working to promote change and improvement in a particular field or community. They may be looking to make a local, regional, national, or global need, address a need that they have identified. They may be coming to grant making focused in philanthropic investment and some of the preferred tax status that may come with making those type of philanthropic investments. And then, they may be also looking to be recognized for their investments, to share their story with their constituents, with the communities, with larger groups of people, to demonstrate the impact that they're having in the communities where they work and live. And so what all this tells us is that grant makers are attempting to address priorities that they have identified or address their own goals and interests. And grant makers may intend to influence, advance, or change an issue of national, regional, or local importance. Whereas government funders tend to fund projects likely to or already proven to succeed, there are foundations that will fund pilot or proof of concept work or seed new research areas. Some take on risks in untested ideas and emerging fields, and many invest in specific researchers and their work. Many foundations have been created by people who have enjoyed exceptional financial success, and so they are often very relationship driven and personal in nature. Their purpose and strategy may be driven by the vision, values, and experiences of their founders. And successfully pursuing grant funding requires that you respond to these priorities, goals, and interests to be most competitive. To effectively respond to a funder's priorities, you must first understand their agenda. So here are some examples of the different types of foundations and impact on giving. And while there are so many foundations, seemingly for every issue or problem imaginable, they all have different scopes and ways of supporting efforts that are critical to understand in order to match a project with a foundation funder. So there are mission-driven foundations, which is how the foundation defines their focus, is based on a mission or an overarching goal. And that mission may be defined or focused in many different ways. Some of the following would be geographic focus. So it could focus on their funding on where they are located or where their founders are from, where their constituents live, where their board members are from or have connection to, and other factors. And this is one that is usually or often pretty clear either in the guidelines of a foundation or if, when we do some research and look at who they've given money to in the past, it's typically, you can typically see a pretty strong pattern of what communities, what areas they're looking to fund geographically. They may also be topic focused. They may focus on a specific content or research area, or they can be program focused. There may be particular types of programs or populations served through those programs that the foundation focuses their giving on. For corporate foundations, they may operate very similarly to a mission-driven foundation, but there may be a particular focus on the communities where the corporation is located, where its employees live and work, or where the clients or constituents reside. They also tend to focus on the impact of their funding that can be shared publicly, as well as with their stakeholders, or shareholders, I should say. And then for family foundations, they often operate more like an individual prospect. And so they may be private, targeting their giving to pre-selected organizations and giving outright gifts based on the relationship rather than a grant through a proposal or request for proposal. Or they can be public type with publicly available guidelines and regular proposal deadlines, and they may operate more like a private foundation. Okay, and then some things to keep in mind about how foundations and corporate or public family foundations typically work. So again, they are typically mission driven. What overarching mission or vision guides the giving of this organization? Why do they give? What is their passion or preferred cause? They typically are focused on a specific and measurable impact. So what activities will support fund, and what do you want to do, and how you will know along the way that you are successful in pursuing those goals is what they want to know right away, right? They have a wide range of interests and funding levels, of course. I mean, foundations may fund anywhere from $1,000 to multi-million-dollar projects. There's just a tremendous variety or range. Method of contact varies widely. So, and we'll talk about foundations that accept unsolicited proposals versus those that don't, and some of the strategies that can be helpful in getting through to those that don't want to be contacted with a proposal or request for funding as the initial approach. But it's really important, I would say, to figure that piece out of what their preferred method of communication is, and to ensure that you are following along with their requests. And then reporting and evaluation requirements. Of course, there's a wide range of reporting requirements and expectations as far as evaluation of your project that are important to keep in mind when applying for funding. Remembering that you and your team will need to have the time and bandwidth to meet these requirements is an important element to keep in mind when looking to pursue foundation funding. Okay, so this kind of goes over what foundations typically fund. So they typically fund new or expanded projects, external and community-facing impact-based projects, and collaborative and innovative projects. And typically, although I'll say not always, they don't fund capital projects, so brick and mortar, new buildings, that sort of thing. Scholarships, endowments, professorships, and general operating expenses are not typically things that they fund. I would say that there are exceptions. And, you know, with family foundations, there can be some more flexibility. So I would say whatever the need is, when in doubt, you know, reach out to someone from the advancement team to ask them if they think that a particular project or a need might be a good fit for foundation or corporate foundation funding. Okay, and this just kind of goes over the different ways, again, that a foundation may define their focus. So again, geographic, topical, programmatic. And so I think when we talk about the topical piece, here are some examples of topics that I would say a lot of foundations and corporate foundations are interested in funding now. Obviously, those are always kind of changing and based on a variety of things. Obviously, COVID-19 and everything that has come out of that, all of the, you know, racial and social inequity that has come out of that, as well as the health impact, is certainly a topic that, you know, you could add to this list. And so just to say that this list is always kind of evolving and changing. But some of the big topics I would say would be health disparities, social determinants of health, strategy-based interventions, so trainings, community outreach, education, projects that are disease or condition specific. I would say really for every disease out there, there's a foundation, be it small or large, that is focused on that. So sometimes it's a matter of just looking in that way, searching to find a match between the topic of your research or your work and a foundation that's dedicated to supporting those efforts. And then population served focus, children, elderly, minorities, other underrepresented or vulnerable populations are big ones that come up a lot of times in kind of how foundations define their focus. So this information reflects the diversity and range of foundations that exist and how we think about alignment of funding needs and opportunities when working with faculty to identify and match projects with funding opportunities. All of these different lenses of focus allow us to ensure that we are matching the best fit in project to increase the likelihood of a successful grant or gift request. And I'll just add a little bit to what I've talked about for foundations and say a few additional things to keep in mind for corporate giving. So, you know, the need to align with a company's primary goals and objectives. I think, you know, most corporate grant making comes through corporate foundations, which is a nonprofit entity created by a for-profit company. And, you know, there's always close ties that typically continue to exist between those organizations. And so having giving strategies that reflect the company interest is something to keep in mind for corporate foundations. There are also other mechanisms for corporations to support programming, research, and other initiatives directly through contracts, through outright gifts, through gifts in kind, which would be donating of training or equipment at no cost, and other forms of giving. So the other thing to keep in mind is that related to that idea of a corporate foundation having close ties to that corporation, corporate giving is typically focused on the return on investment for the funder. And so it's important to be able to demonstrate that ROI and measurable outcomes and impact when considering corporate giving. Okay, so some key questions to keep in mind for planning and writing proposals. So before you start writing a proposal, you want to make sure that you are thinking about the project purpose or goal. So what problem are you looking to address? And again, what will success look like? You will need to develop a specific, meaningful, and actionable plan for what you want to do and why you want to do it, with benchmarks along the way. It's also important to consider the audience who will be reviewing your proposal. Have you researched or considered the mission and goals of the organization you are applying to? How is what you want to do aligned with what this agency is all about? It's also important to consider the audience when thinking about the technical language you want to include or not include in your proposal. So while a funder may support complex medical research projects, they may not have any medical background. And so this is important to consider when starting to write a proposal. The second bullet point, why your project, why College of Medicine, why University of Illinois? It's important to consider and speak to the expertise and credibility of your team and the population you are serving or targeting with your project. What makes your team and the college and or the university overall uniquely positioned to implement this project? And then bullet point number 3, goals and SMART objectives and outcomes. Measurable goals are an important part of practically any grant or funding request to a foundation or corporation. Many funders specifically ask for SMART objectives, which are specific, measurable, actionable, relevant, and time-bound. And so it's always important to kind of think about your project within those confines of what are the goals, what are the measurable objectives that you can track along the way to know that you're making progress towards your overarching goal. Timeline. So what is the timeline for your project? How will activities be sustained after the grant period? And this, I think, is a really important point. Most foundations typically fund for 1 year at a time, and there may be opportunity to reapply, but they're often, pretty short term. And so funders want to know what other funding sources you may have, and as well as kind of what the timeline of what activities will continue past the grant period, and what activities are really part of this grant and will be will end at the end of the grant period. And then budget. Again, What are you asking for and why? What other funding sources, including organizational support, exist for your project? Okay. So some tips and tricks to presenting to external audiences. So the first one, pay attention to funders' key interests and methods of preferred approach. This is really important to demonstrate that you have done your homework, know what the organization funds, and how they like to be asked. This is critical to starting the relationship on the right foot and is something that the College of Medicine advancement team can help you to coordinate. The second bullet point, read and reread guidelines and write carefully customized proposals. Again, this is an area where the College of Medicine advancement team has expertise and can help you to ensure your proposal or approach is aligned with the giving priorities and guidelines of the funder. This is a big reason that grant proposals get declined, not because the project isn't compelling or deemed worthy of support, but because it's easy to miss a thematic or even formatting requirement that can get your proposal disqualified before it's even really considered. And so it's so important to read funder guidelines and ensure you are well aligned with the funding priorities of the funder and making that match clear in your narrative, really spell it out. Equally important, it's equally important to ensure that you are carefully reviewing and formatting your proposal per the specific style and content guidelines laid out by the funding organization. I mean, I have had proposals just, I've worked with people who've had proposals declined for not, double spacing or for using the wrong size font. And so, which is, kind of ridiculous, but it's a way of funders ensuring that you are carefully reading their guidelines and you're following the directions. So always important to read and reread. Okay, so bullet 3, a budget and budget narrative tells an important story about your project and the benefit to your patients, clients, or communities. So I always like to think about a proposal budget as a way of telling the story or demonstrating the impact that funding will provide to an organization and to those that will benefit in a different way than your narrative. So while the College of Medicine and the University of Illinois overall has a very specific process and format for grant budgets, if you've worked on larger federal proposals or anything like that, the budgets that you want to be presenting to a foundation need to be a little different. And they really need to be tailored to demonstrate the impact, the return on investment, and the other funding sources, including organizational support that are in place for your project. And then finally, an approved proposal isn't the end, of course, it's just the beginning. So while submitting a funding request can require a big lift for you and your team, of course, that's really just the beginning. And with an approved grant award, the real work begins. Okay. So some additional kind of grant writing tips, know your audience and how they want to communicate. Again, I think it's really important to keep in mind if they have guidelines that say that they don't accept unsolicited proposals, which I have found is more and more common. That isn't necessarily a full stop, but it does take a slightly different approach. So I would say if a funder clearly states that they don't accept unsolicited proposals, we really don't want that initial contact to be sending in a proposal anyway. I've never had that work out in a positive way, but there are other ways to kind of initiate a conversation that can result in a relationship and even funding coming down the line. And so I would say in those cases, we usually see if there's an initial approach, if we can share information on a high level about our organization and some of the projects that we do, just to kind of start a conversation. Sometimes that doesn't go much of anywhere either, but I have found that it is more likely to work out if you try in that kind of high level, making contact without an ask, and then develop a relationship and see if down the line there may be an opportunity to apply. Keep it short and simple. Again, I think it's always best to assume that the reviewers reading your proposal don't have expertise in your content area. And so again, this is an area where we can be a real resource to you because we're also not content experts. And so we're able to read your proposals and say whether it's understandable to somebody without kind of a deep research background, or if there's ways that we need to kind of make it more accessible for people without kind of the content knowledge. So it's a delicate balance. You want to make sure that you're including all the information that is relevant to your project, but you don't want it to be so full of technical language that it feels inaccessible to a layman who is reading it and doesn't have that expertise. Again, reread those guidelines and let that guide your content. I would say most foundations have clearly defined guidelines of how what questions they want you to answer and the format of your proposal. And if they don't, there are templates available that are considered kind of best practice and that we can help you to utilize so that you're covering all the information that a funder may want to know about your project. Again, related to kind of keep it short and simple, think about your project from 10,000 feet. Everyone is guilty of this when you are working in a space, we all get kind of focused on very minute details. And it's important to think about your project from high up. So, and also from an external facing perspective. So, what is the elevator speech for your project? What would an external person who has no knowledge of your content area want to know about your project and the impact that their funding can make to advance knowledge, to benefit communities, and to improve outcomes in a particular area? Okay, and I wanted to talk a little bit about, there's a lot of information on here, and I can certainly share this with Vicki and she can share it out to the larger group. But there are, in addition to the College of Medicine Advancement Team and myself for corporate and foundation relations, there are several resources available to you through UIC and specifically the Office of the Vice Chancellor for Research. So the OVCR website offers a variety of resources for faculty to support identification of funders and the submission process. The Develop Your Proposal page goes through high-level planning of various components of a proposal, and the funding portal is a nice presentation of select funding opportunities. Much of the nuts and bolts information about preparing and submitting grant applications is on the Office of Sponsored Programs web pages. So I will talk through some of these today, and we can share this list with links to the group. And I invite you to get in there and explore and see what is available. So some of the tools, some of the resources, Research Development Services has a weekly newsletter, the RDS News, that you can sign up for and sends you a weekly email, and it contains funding opportunities, news, and events. I would say a fair amount of it is focused on government funding, but there are also some private funding opportunities listed in there. Academic Analytics is a database used to identify collaborators across the organization who may be working in the same space as you. And it can be really useful to identify collaborators for your research, other faculty that are working in similar spaces and where there may be opportunity for collaboration. And then there are a few different funding search databases available to you. And we also, the College of Medicine Advancement Team has some internal subscription only databases that we have access to. And so again, if you're interested in a particular area of research and funders who are funding in that space, we can help you to do some of that research. But the OVCR funding portal is searchable, database of research funding opportunities. Again, kind of might lean a little more on the government funding opportunities, but there are some CFR things in there periodically. And it's also a useful resource to seeing the different types of projects and research areas that the federal government is funding, which I think is really useful because typically we see kind of different priority areas come out in those federal funding opportunities, and it typically trickles down to some of the foundations and corporate foundations because they want to, of course, align and kind of maximize the impact of their funding to have it be in alignment with some of those larger funding opportunities. There's also Pivot, which I am not as familiar with, but the Office of the Vice Chancellor for Research offers access to on their website, and it is available to all university faculty, staff, and students. And it is a searchable funding opportunity and expertise database. So I think that that is a really useful tool. And there's also this, this nice YouTube video that I will again share out that talks about how to use Pivot that I found very useful, and I think others would as well. And then there's also a good amount of funding opportunities and some training resources from the Center for Clinical and Translational Science. So I would encourage you all to look around their website as well. As far as trainings and online resources, I know that the Research Development Office periodically does offer training on writing grant proposals and other resources related to that. And then there's also this, I think, a useful tool from NIH, which offers some training on how to format and write a grant proposal. So there are a fair amount of resources internally and some external ones that can be a resource. And so if you have questions or are looking for a particular, support in a particular way, please reach out to us. Okay, and knowing a gift or grant opportunity when you see it. So these are just like some examples that faculty in the College of Medicine have experienced and that our team has been involved in, where an encounter may not have initially seemed related to a gift or a grant, but where an interest or appreciation for a program, faculty member, or department has led to philanthropic support. So I just wanted to provide you with some of these examples to just let you know that it doesn't always take the form of an RFP or a request for proposals. And when in doubt, when something seems like it might lead to something more, please reach out to our team. So here are some examples. A corporate partner expresses interest in donating equipment, services, or funds to support your project. A foundation trustee may contact you to ask more about your research or your department. A grateful patient may ask you or your staff how they could support your work or make a gift in honor of the care they received. A corporation is interested in getting involved, attending or supporting your research symposium, or what they are working in and how it aligns with your project, and you think that they should be involved in that event. Those are instances where we can work with you to make connections and help to foster relationships that may result in philanthropic funding or support. And so in these or any other scenarios where it seems like there may be an opportunity for giving, please reach out to any of us, Dina, myself, Miranda on your campus, and just let us know if we can help. Okay, so in closing, I just wanted to go over some of the ways that we would ask that you work with our advancement team to help us support your work. So to help us, we would ask that you would work with us in the following ways. To help identify projects that may be a good fit or naturally aligned with foundations and or corporations. To connect us to faculty and connect faculty to us when a need or opportunity comes up. We would ask that you please inform us of faculty plans, or if you are aware of a grant or gift that advancement has not been involved in, but where additional follow-up or support stewarding a relationship is needed or would be helpful to you and your team. This is also important when considering that, again, some funders only accept one application per organization. There are plenty that are funding multiple projects across the university, but some will only accept one application per organization. And we always want to make sure that we're not competing with ourselves but instead submitting an application for the proposal that's most likely to be awarded. And finally, we ask that if you have questions about searching for funding or about the internal requirements for pre and post application submission, that you contact us so that we can help you to navigate those processes. And that is the end of my presentation. And I will, let's see, end the slideshow and close my, oops, sorry. Okay.
Morgan, that was great. Thank you so much. There's no real questions in the chat yet, but maybe we can just open it up for questions.
Sure.
And a conversation if anyone.
Yeah,
has
and I
questions.
know I covered a lot of information, so feel free to kind of think about it. And also, Vicki will share the recording of the presentation, and we can also continue the conversation after today.
We can share the slides too, right, Morgan, with all the information links.
Yeah.
Thank you again. Thank you so much. I think you included different aspects of this grants and how to even writing and all other some details. So thank you so much.
Of course.
One thing I was thinking, like in terms of connecting the faculty, who is doing maybe an excellent research in one area to a corporate, so what I'm trying to say is that is any database available where somebody is doing, for example, lung cancer, or somebody has some sort of biomarker came up and they published, but as you know, most of the scientists or faculties, they may be a little bit afraid of, contacting, the potential corporate system, and a little bit shy on that. And so how that interface can be effectively implemented,
Yeah, that's a good question. So yeah, when there's a particular topic area and kind of the idea of an alignment, but some questions and not really sure where to start, I mean, that's definitely where our team can be a resource. So a lot of what we do is just finding the right contact within a foundation or a corporation and making that initial, that initial approach. So scheduling, sending an email, scheduling a call, and, ideally getting the faculty member in front of somebody who works with the grants program or is a program officer for the foundation so that they can talk about their work. And then we can be there to kind of help with the nuts and bolts of, what questions they may have about the organization, what questions they may have about kind of the structure of how this fits in with the university overall or the college, what information they might want in a grant proposal, what their guidelines are, and all of that. So we can kind of handle the approach piece, the relationship, and then, faculty can come in, we can facilitate all of that, and then the faculty can come in and just speak directly to their work so that your faculty aren't spending a lot of time trying to figure out who it is at XYZ Corporation that's the right person to contact. That's what we're here for. So
thank you.
So Morgan, we had a seminar, so I was a little late. So thank you, for giving this very, very useful and interesting talk about this topic. I have one question, for the cancer center. I know they previously have provided this a large library, which is a lot of compounds, or kind of drugs which can be used. I know so people can use to test, they have some small grant for people to apply as well, or collaboration. So I know the director has left early this year. So do you have some updates about this cancer center or about potential the library?
Yeah, I don't have, thank you for asking that. And it's an interesting topic. And I think it certainly lines up with College of Medicine and with what you all are working on and what our team is striving to do. I would say it gets a little more complicated when we go kind of beyond College of Medicine into the UI Health
different,
space and the Cancer
ah,
Center.
right.
And so right now we don't really actively fundraise. Our advancement team doesn't,
Okay.
but it is something that we are kind of working through for the future to figure out how we can collaborate, because I do think there's so much natural collaboration
Yeah.
that we really should be tapping into. And I think so much of that would be a really good fit for corporate and foundation funding. So I know that they do have a new director.
Okay.
I still haven't met with that person, but
Uh-huh.
I don't know, Dina, if you have anything else to add, but it is an area that we know that we should be doing more in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Sure. Thanks.
Yeah.
Because they have, I think they sometimes have this already in clinical trial, or like a new, like potential, have this kind of translational potential candidates compounds, like we can use potential test. Yeah. But thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
Morgan, do you want to like maybe give an example of like a successful relationship you've had with like faculty and corporate, you know, in your work?
Yeah. I mean, sure. I can certainly talk about that. I think one area that I've worked a lot in and work to kind of strengthen external relationships would be the Department of Surgery, where obviously there's a lot of kind of natural partnership with corporations who may be developing medical equipment, right? They may be the ones building some of the equipment that's used for training, but where a relationship kind of hasn't gone beyond that and that kind of transactional sort of, we want your equipment in our space. And so that would be a place where I've worked with faculty who already have connections with some of these corporations, but they don't necessarily know how to talk about philanthropic needs or talk about kind of a broader story of what the college is doing in this space and where there's opportunity to partner. And so that would be a time when, you know, while we rely on the faculty to talk about the very specific technical aspects of the work that they're doing, the training, the equipment, how it's used, we can talk about kind of how it fits into larger investment strategies and priority areas for the college, and how, in addition to equipment or training, like additional support can help us to better train, you know, our students, and it also can help the corporation to get their equipment in front of future medical providers, to get you know, kind of the work that they're doing out in front of the communities that we serve, so that their presence is known and that it's a mutually beneficial kind of relationship.
Yeah, so I have a question. Thank you so much for a great presentation and for providing so many resources. And I assume that you will be providing these links to us shortly after this meeting. But I'm really new to this one as compared to, I think, so many of my colleagues over here. So my question is like, at what is a good time to reach your office if there is there's a conceptual proposal in my mind, or should you think it has to be, I need to identify that these other resources or write down something? Because like, at what is a good point to start and basically contact your office?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say kind of any time is a good time. I think I've talked with faculty who are really early in you know, designing a research project or working in a space. And I think it can be useful not to change kind of the scope of the project, but to think about kind of the questions that an external funder might ask, and things like, you know, a timeline, measurable objectives of kind of what you want to accomplish and when, and how you'll know along the way, you know, that you're making progress in the right direction. I think that in those ways, you can kind of set up your project to be more ready to apply for external funding. But I would say certainly even a project that's already kind of off the ground and running, if there's a need, and if you anticipate that there'll be an additional need in the future, is a good time to reach out. Because the other thing about corporate and foundation funding is it can often take quite a bit of time, right? From when you make that initial connection to a funder to getting invited to apply. And then some foundations, they may only review proposals when they have a board meeting, and that may only happen once a year. It could happen twice a year, it could happen quarterly, but it can take some time. And so I think it's always best to kind of be planning ahead and not already kind of in the, okay, we need this money right now in order to continue this project. Because while gifts from a foundation, a family foundation, a corporation can come in a little faster, if it's a foundation that has a full proposal and guidelines, they typically, I would say take anywhere from like 3 to 8 months from when you apply to when you get a funding decision.
So, and what about the issues related to space? That needs to be first in some kind of an agreement with the College of Medicine, or before reaching your office, or
You mean kind of the space of where?
Yeah, where that thing would be. Like, for example, if you're trying to think something, setting up another place or something, you think this is something which is probably a need, and everybody who is proposing something understand that there is a need. But if you feel that this is something which is doable, this is something which is not there on our campus, and you need a space. So do you think like it's a good idea? And I'm speaking from Rockford, like, and you might not be very much aware of like what our constraints are as far as the physical, but I think so it is much more in demand in Chicago, I believe. So how that needs to be, like, it needs to be first to go to your office and see this is viable project, and then basically go to the deans and find a space, or the other way.
Well,
I don't,
yeah, that's also a good question. I would say, we do a fair amount of working with department heads or division chiefs to ensure that there is organizational buy-in, right, for a project. And that sometimes may have to get, moved up the ladder to talking with the dean to ensure not just like, does this have a physical space to exist in? I mean, that is a very important element, but also, is this something that the organization supports? And so that kind of also ties into this question of the sustainability of a project after a grant period. So is the department, is the organization, committed to ensuring that this project will continue? If you get, let's say, 1 year of funding, you want to make sure that, the grant period ends, you don't want to have to close up shop, right? You want there to be some continuation. And so I would say it's always a good idea to talk with your department head, but we can also help facilitate, if you have questions, we can help to kind of move it up the pipeline to figure out like who needs to say this can go there, or no, we need to, this is not a priority right now, or whatever it is. So I think it's always good to make sure that you have organizational buy-in before, we get too far into applying for external funding. But it is something that we always ask about when we're talking with faculty about pursuing a project or pursuing funding for a project.
Thank you. I always find this one like as a chicken and egg question kind of a thing. And
It
what
is.
to do further.
It is, yeah. But I would say, sometimes having, because advancement is not in your department, because we are a more central college-wide office, sometimes us talking to a department head to say, this project is really compelling for a foundation to fund. We have some identified funders who we think would be interested in this project. I mean, sometimes that can help to make the case for space or, organizational commitment. So it is a little chicken and the egg, but we are used to kind of working on it from all those different angles.
Thank you for your insight about this. And I think so. This is what I was trying to think about. Like, okay, is it a viable project from a funding point of view? So probably I will reach out to your office in the next few months, hopefully.
Yeah, great.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, I have a question on, it's a basic question. So we usually get emails from industries or companies, from pharmaceutical companies, to collaborate with, they are interested in our work and collaborate. So I'm not very sure, it can be a spam or it can be something else. So how, first question is this industries coming under corporate foundation, or they are different? Or in such situations, industries? Does we need to contact you or we can talk to them?
Well, I mean, I would say, yes, typically like an industry organization, if they're reaching out to you with an interest, I would say there's nothing wrong with you reaching out to them directly. If questions come up or if there's kind of requirements of what that would entail that feel kind of beyond the scope of just talking about like your direct project, that, we can certainly be called, you can email us or, we can schedule a time to talk and see if it makes sense for our office to be involved in some degree, or if it seems like something that's more directly really related to your project and that you can pursue. And we can also help with kind of deciphering if something is legitimate or a little, not. So.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, I think we're just about at end of time. So I'm just go ahead and I put my email and Dina's email into the chat. And again, Vicky will share the slides, and I will also kind of include in that email a more direct list of some of the resources that I put, so you don't have to kind of pull it out of the PowerPoint. But, thank you so much for your time. And if you have any questions or would like to talk more, please reach out to us, and we look forward to working with you.